I've got a couple of announcements to make. Couple of announcements. When you listen to Premier Peckford, when you look at it, uh, when you listen to a lot of our speakers, when you look at some of our federal problems, sometimes the solutions seem. Hello, Danielle Smith. How are you? Could we have a round of applause for Danielle Smith, our dear friend? Thanks for stopping in. When you look at some of the difficulties we have in our country, sometimes you think we should have our own country. And if you're thinking that we should have our own country, uh, Michael Wagner has a couple of books at the back that will tell you some of the obstacles of having your own country. But it would be a lot easier to eventually end up with our own country if we have a clearer understanding of the obstacles. So if you haven't got a couple of his books, think about it before you leave. There's a few things coming up this week. Joseph Burgot, who, as you know, we all met last night, and Theo Fleury, they're going to be in Olds tonight between 6 and 9 p.m. at the Olds and District Evergreen Center. And then for those of you who are watching online from Lloydminster, which I know there's certainly quite a few, Theo and Joseph are going to be at the Vic Juba Center in Lloydminster at 7 o'clock on Wednesday night. So if you want to stop by and hear Joseph's vision for the future of our country, tonight in Olds between 6 and 9 p.m. and Wednesday between 7 and 9 p.m. in Lloydminster. Having said that, I think we're back on to where we were before we had such a inspirational speech from Premier Peckford. We interrupted the question and answer with Michelle and Nancy, and Tammy. And I know we had one question, and where is? Yeah, no, Tammy's right there. But Barry Goss was standing in line. Oh, there's Barry. Yeah, Barry was standing in line to ask a question when we cut it off just before lunch. So come on up, Barry. Oh, I said you come up and ask a question. Turns out he's Norm's brother. He wants to make a comment. So anyway.
That's okay, Norm, right? We can be brothers.
Most people, that's right.
It wasn't really any question. It was how we feel Alberta is sort of taken for granted in Canada, and how sort of unfair that all is. But I'm a graduate of the U of A, and there's some fairly significant edifices on that campus that were paid for by some people here in Calgary, Alan Markin being one, and there's a couple of others. And I venture to say that a minority of the students, especially in engineering, where the faculty I was in, have any idea who those people are and how much money they donated and how hard they had to work for that money. And I just think that's a travesty, because even in Alberta, and I kind of hate to pick on my alma mater, but I am. I just think that's wrong. And anyway, just my thoughts.
Barry, I don't think you could be more correct. And Thomas Sowell said, when you tell someone the truth, you're trying to help them. When you tell them what they want to hear, you're trying to help yourself. And I think you're truly, that is a message that our universities, both in Edmonton and Calgary, they should take it to heart before we take them to task. Because I think more and more people that I'm talking to are saying we need to take we need to take some of these educational establishments to task. And I mean, some of your friends that you're mentioning, Barry, some of them would turn over in their grave if they knew what people were teaching from the buildings that they paid for. And so I think it's fair to say, let be a polite warning to our academics. And, Anne Rand, I mentioned this earlier, she had a book, The New Intellectuals, and she said, like, basically, and Patrick Moore talked about this in and I think Andrew Lawton did too as well. He said there's a growing divide in the world between producers of wealth and consumers of wealth. And quite frankly, I think it's fair to say that our universities are generally speaking in the consumers of wealth. And I mean, I think they hold, in lots of cases, they hold our producers of wealth in absolute contempt. And I think it's something that they're going to have to deal with, like I say, before we do. And so I think we would all be doing our alma maters a favor to call them and say, okay, enough is enough. Like we want at the very least, we want is balance. You know what I mean? And so anyway, having said that, does anyone have a question for Michelle or Tammy? Like, I apologize for sort of splitting that in the middle because as it turned out, Premier Peckford was only available between 12 and 1. And so we had to sort of, miss our question. But did anybody have another question? If not, Foon, yeah, come on up. And Paul has a question too. Good. Okay. Come on up, Foon. You can be next.
Once again, I want to thank both of these incredible individuals and the work that they're doing. And I guess, again, I'm looking for free advice. But how do we overcome this intellectual theft that's going on? And again, what do you feel are the solutions? And I know that like I say, you're doing great work, but just what can we as the audience do to try and get the truth out there, I guess, because it's just so pervasive, the lies that are going on, and it's just frustrating. So I'd love to hear your comments on what you think that we as the audience should and could do.
Well, one thing that I think we can do, and I think that Friends of Science has been fairly successful at doing, in part thanks to Robert Lyman and one of our colleagues, is that we've been exposing the volume of money pouring into the green movement. So we have 4 reports. I nicknamed them the 4 green reports. I did a previous presentation for Freedom Talk in 2019 called Foreign Fingers in the Pie, which summarizes them. But when you see the incredible numbers, like I think it was between 2000 and 2018, the top 40 ENGOs, environmental groups in Canada, had 18 times the revenues of all the political parties in Canada combined.
$925 million.
Yeah. So, and when you start to reveal that to people, then they understand, wow, Dr. Suzuki isn't running around in his little shirt, his little fringed jacket, beaded jacket, and his old jeans, collecting $30 checks from grandmas, and poor him, he needs more money. His organization is a multi-million-dollar operation. And when you find out, if you read Parker Gallant's work, Parker has shown that the Strathmere Alliance, which is about 14 of the top environmental groups, which includes CANRAC, the Climate Action Network of Canada, and within the umbrella of CANRAC, there's another 100 environmental groups and unions. When you find out that those guys are getting together with the media and an ad agency and coordinating messaging with media influencers prior to the election, and they have all this other money in their slush fund, then you start to realize, oh, this is why all politicians talk about climate change, because they want these votes, and they probably get money one way or another by following the path that these guys lay out. Not to mention, each of these groups has dozens of lobbyists in Ottawa, and they are in and out of ministerial offices every day. So if you read our reports and if you start explaining to your friends and family that when people say, oh, it's big oil, yeah, well, look at what these big green people are doing. They have a ton of money. They also have a cause that most corporations and businesses don't have. Corporations and businesses just want to do business. If they want to dig coal or build a pipeline or whatever it is, they just want to do business, right? They don't have a cause, but all of these NGOs have a cause, like you're saving the planet. So it's very easy to draw people in and get them all fired up to go and glue themselves to the door of the bank or whatever it might be. So that's why we have to expose this. And once you expose it, then people realize, oh, that's what's been going on. The penny drops. But it's a complicated discussion. But read those reports and you'll be able to do something more.
I'll give you. Is it just me, but does anyone else wonder why when those people glue themselves to the door of the bank, why they don't leave them there till the glue wears out? I mean, this is crazy. But anyway, go ahead, Tam.
I just have a couple points to make. First, I just want to plug my podcast. It's called The Nemeth Report. It's on Apple and Spotify, and it's on Anchor FM. And I also have a YouTube channel that streams them. And I have a new video coming out called The Top 10 Findings of the Allen Inquiry. I showed it to my mother-in-law when I was drafting it, and she's like, "Oh my gosh, why does no one know about this?" I'm like, exactly. Why does no one know? So this is a top 10. It's about 7.5 minutes long, and I think that's about the appropriate attention span of people these days. The second thing is, like, when I was talking about the transnational progressive movement, it's a movement, which means it doesn't necessarily have a little cabal at the top making all these different plans. Like, quite often it pulls together lots of different groups with differing interests. But the thing is, right now, over the past 10 or 15 years, they've been united in one thing, and that is to destroy the petroleum industry, to destroy hydrocarbons, especially in the West. So yes, there's this great reset. That's one of the plans out there. That's the one that we know about or whatever. And there's all these different groups out there, and it's difficult sometimes to determine exactly what the ultimate end game is. But it's clear that there is working towards shifting the way our society works. And what's happening right now with the sanctions against Russia and the split of the currency, this is huge. This is new Bretton Woods. And if people don't know what Bretton Woods is, it was after World War II or near the end of World War II. They were planning how to redo the global structure, and it had a bunch of different components. One was the financial system. So Bretton Woods created the IMF and the World Bank. Another was to have some kind of political unity, a place where things could be discussed, and that was the UN. And then there was defense agreements, multilateral agreements like NATO and CETO eventually. And at the center of that was oil, because they realized during World War II that oil is what won the war. And it also was going to redo the economies of the world. So that was at the center. And then you had a bit of a restructuring in 71 when Nixon took America off the gold standard. And you had the rise of the petrodollar, which was the American currency. And they talked about changing it in 2008, but now they're actually in a position to do it. So when you change that financial structure, that changes how the economies work. And we're seeing that with the ESG scores, the task force for climate-related financial disclosures, where it changes how finances operate and businesses operate. So we're on the verge of something. I'm not saying that it's this big conspiracy and stuff, but there is a plan. And at some point, you have to take them at their word. And I kept thinking of The Princess Bride, because we just watched this recently with my children. And you have Inigo Montoya going along saying, you killed my father, prepare to die. And he kept saying this over and over throughout the movie until he actually encounters the guy. And before, you're thinking, well, when are you ever going to do this? And then he confronts the guy, and he very calmly says it, and he keeps repeating and repeating until he actually kills the guy. And I feel like this is what the environmental groups and this movement has been doing. They've been saying for 15 years they're going to kill the oil industry, they're going to kill hydrocarbons, and they're standing now with the sword pointing at us. So what we can do about it is work at our local levels to go chipping at little things and to try and convince people around us of what's going on. But you have to do it carefully and gently, because it's overwhelming. And if people realize what's happening, then they'll feel obligated. They have to do something. And most people don't want to do anything. So it's important just to plant the seeds. And you might think, oh my gosh, that's not going to do anything. But you never know what you'll get from that. So please plant as many seeds as you can, gently. Thank you.
Thank you, Tammy. When you mentioned a 7-minute attention span, maybe I can watch it in seven sections. I don't think my attention span's that long, but when you mentioned like I'm going to kill you, it reminds me of a Far Side cartoon where they're strapping this odd-looking guy into the electric chair, and he's going, man, this is just like in the movies. I thought, yeah, buddy, did you see the end of that movie? But in any event, we're getting close to John's closing remarks, but we've got two new additions to our agenda. One is, I'm going to call it the Passionate Presenters Award, which we're going to give it to Norm for this year for passionately trying to get his issue onto the podium, and but lest everyone start trying to force their way onto our podium, like in future sessions, like the Passionate Presenter Award, each session we'll give the person who's done it either 5 minutes, or we'll hang them at the end of our conference. So like, if you really feel passionate about your thing, go ahead, try and push your way onto the stage, but there's a 50-50 chance you'll see the end of the movie. Yes, exactly. And then the second part of our the new addition is we're going to have the Colonel Says, and we've got Colonel Redmond here. He's going to give us some advice on what we can do moving forward. And like I said, I think that we could probably have that around for a long time, because I don't think our problem is going to go away anytime soon. So Norm, you got 5 minutes. Thank you for being so. Oh no, just wait. Oh sorry, Foon, I didn't. Speaking of passionate presenters, how about maybe we could have how about a passionate questioner? You got one question? Go ahead.
The dishonesty of the anti-fossil fuel movement knows no bounds. Earlier, one presenter commented that, since 1960, the temperature of the world has been rising. Well, why did they do that? Well, because it conveniently bypasses the medieval warm period, which would have kind of killed the intent of their graph. The one other one was that since AGW wasn't doing what they were hoping to do, they morphed it into something called climate change. And in that way, they could capture both hot and cold changes. These are just comments. My real question to the two ladies behind me is that they have used this 1.5 degrees C increase in global temperatures as a hammer and as a way of trying to instill fear into the world, and the kids of the world are, we're all going to cook because the temperature rises over 1.5 degrees. So that I'm going to leave that question with the two ladies, and because it's again, it's because of models, and not because it's based on data that they made this 1.5 degree increase in temperature as something to avoid.
Thank you. You want to comment on that, or go ahead? Yeah.
Yes, the 2 degree temperature limit, which was the original limit, was set by William Nordhaus 40 years ago, and his nephew, Ted Nordhaus, has written in Foreign Affairs magazine under the 2 degree delusion that his uncle set it completely arbitrarily. And so it's a completely arbitrary number. And last month I wasn't feeling that great, and I started thinking about the 1.5 degrees and just taking my temperature, and I realized, well, actually there's a thermometer now that has an alarm if you go over what is considered to be a safe limit for your own fever. And it's the 1.5 degrees. So basically what they've done is they've taken the thermometer that a human uses, or the range that a human uses to keep themselves well if they have a fever, they've applied it to the planet. And that's why you see all those pictures of Earth with a little thermometer. But this is anthropomorphizing the whole climate change thing. And Bjorn Lomborg has shown that if every country met all their targets, there would not be a change in temperature. They would never be below 1.5 degrees Celsius. Not to mention, as I showed before, it's a chaotic system. So if there's a volcano or solar flares, some big tectonic shift, there could be a change, warmer or cooler, completely beyond our control. So that's that.
I agree with everything Michelle just said. It's absolutely right. I mean, is there a control knob for Earth's temperature that we can just adjust? So I was thinking also of all the times that energy is never taken, the benefits have never been taken into account. And we always say that things are getting worse. But if you look at Marion Tupy's work, if you look at Michael Schellenberger, Bjorn Lomborg, Alex Epstein, you see that there's actually lots of positive things that hydrocarbons have brought to our world. So why isn't that never counted as part of this? And which relates to the arbitrary temperature thing, because they don't want it that way.
Okay, let's give these ladies a real big round of applause. And I'm at the risk of giving Norm a heart attack. I just want to do one more thing before I give him the mic. And this has gone.
I'm 73, I'm not a youngster.
Well, you could go home and go and get some rest if you want. But I mean, in any event, we're getting lots of texts from home on how well this is going online, and I really feel like we're putting on an absolute, besides having absolutely world-class speakers, I actually think we're putting on a world-class presentation thanks to David and Stephen. So let's give them a big round of applause, because clearly we're leading the way in innovation on this. So thank you to both of you for being here and for all you've done. So I'm starting the clock, Norm.
So give me a second.
Take a deep breath in. Okay,
I'll tell you when to start the clock. Just get out of here. Okay. Let me do the introduction, and then you start the clock. Because first a little passion. Okay. Let's say science is my religion, truth is my God, and the scientific method is my holy scripture. So that's where my passion comes from. In science, we first gather data, and then from this we come to conclusions. In politics, they first come to conclusion, and then they look for some data to support their conclusion. And that's where we are with COVID. That's where we are with climate. Okay, you can start the clock now. Are we ready? Oh, shit. Okay. Where's this? Oh, where's the right button?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. There we go. So I can see. When Paul was first elected, I wrote this letter conflating. They wanted to spend $2 billion on carbon sequestering, and I thought it would be much better to go into healthcare. Kenny's doing the same thing right now, spending $120 million. Okay, with Michelle, we wrote a paper. They wanted to blame climate change on health, and we said no. The NDP, I'll just skip that one. Okay, so I'm just getting into the climate or the COVID timeline. Okay, starting with Biden back in 2009, that's the way he was going to handle the flu. Okay, so in November, three researchers in November 2019, 3 researchers were infected with COVID. One of them died. The wife of one of them died in 2019. Dr. Li Wenliang identified a bunch of cases, and on December 30th, he was on December 3rd. The government had made him sign a statement that everything he said was false. On the same day, January 3rd, a sample of the virus from the hospital he was at was sent up to Professor Yang Chang. They sequenced the virus in 2 days, and it got sent to the U.S. Center for on January the 6th. The World Health Organization received it and wanted to go to Wuhan, but they were refused entry by the Chinese. The CDC tried to do the same thing through Trump. They were refused. On January the 11th, Edward Holmes, a colleague, was given permission to post the genome on the website. On January the 11th, Trump funded all of the pharmaceutical companies to start work on it. On January the 11th, Moderna received it, and we're starting to work on their on the vaccine. Come on. Oh, whoops. To get back here. Whoops. I'm losing it here. Okay. Yeah, so that's January the 11th. And you don't work on a vaccine unless it's human-to-human transmission. On January 14th, at the instruction of the Chinese government, the World Health Organization said there was no human-to-human transmission. And when you put it together on 28th, the head of the World Health Organization shaking hands with the President Xi. On the 20th of January, they flipped and they said, yeah, it is a problem. And on the 21st of January, the first case was in the US. On the 30th of January, they declared it emergency. On the 30th of January, Trump shut down the border. On the 1st of February, Biden called him a xenophobe. And that's the whole picture right there. Okay, moving along to the climate fraud timeline. Take a moment for that. Tim Ball, this is a book by Tim Ball. Basically, that the whole thing was set up by Maurice Strong. This was from my first paper that I gave in 2005, and I'm just going to read that. Yes, Norm, Kyoto was the point at which Strong and the boys bought in the politics. They saw CO2 as an opportunity to squeeze with science, morality, and politics the great engines of industry and progress. What went on, da-da-da-da. So that's what started it, and it's basically the only hope for the planet is that we collapse industrialist civilizations. The ideology was limits to growth in the first global revolution. It started in 1979 with the first World Climate Conference, but in 1979, the world was still under the throes of the 1970s global cooling scare. Okay, there wasn't enough information to do it, so it was based on an 1896 paper by Arrhenius. So in 1981, Hansen wrote the model paper that everything is based on. Come on. Whoops, I pressed, this doesn't come fast enough. Okay, and then on June 23rd, 1988, he presented this model on which everything is based. That started the whole thing. The only problem was it didn't really account for the 33 years of global cooling that brought on the global cooling scare. To keep the science out of everything, they started the IPCC under UN Resolution 4353 to monopolize all the information disseminated to the public. They released their first IPCC report that said we were going to see warming of 0.3 degrees C per decade. This is a graph of what happened or that was presented at the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement. There happened to be an 18-year pause of no global warming. So when you put that pause in there, this is the data that they actually had. I put the 3 degrees of warming that was supposed to happen that never happened, and that's what the Paris Climate Agreement is based on. In 2013, the head of the IPCC confirmed that there was no global warming. A year later, they said there was global warming. And then 178 people signed on to the accord. And in 1992,
1 minute left.
I know.
That's it, yeah.
Okay. 1992, Maurice Strong set out the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, delineating or deeming China a developing country and freeing them from any emissions, and Canada being deemed a developed country, which gets us to this. That's the Hansen's prediction, and that's all of the 6 IPCC reports and all 3 climate agreements based on that 1.2 degrees warming that never happened. And if anybody is actually interested, that is the science that proves conclusively that it's physically impossible for carbon dioxide to cause any detectable level of global warming. How'd I do?
Thank you. You did good. Thank you very much.
Is that okay?
That was perfect.
I didn't
No,
upset anybody?
no, you didn't upset. Well, nobody that I know. And if you have, I'll hear about it and
No,
I'll let you know.
Charles
But,
not here, so he
no,
won't
that's
get
right, exactly. But well, I mean, we come here, like, I appreciate it, Norm. We've had a little bit of, if you want to call it, fun tension back and forth, and I appreciate that too, because like I said, we spent 80% of the time saying, well, why aren't people more passionate about this? Like, why aren't people prepared to do something about it? And then when somebody passionate like Norm comes along and says, no, you can't speak. So I think now I think we put our money where our mouth is. We said, yeah, you be passionate. We'll either let you speak or hang you, whichever, like we'll decide as the time goes by. But let's thank Norm for being passionate. And speaking of passionate people who are always happy to have speak, John Robson, you're up.
Oh, thank you very much. It is my privilege.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry. Yeah, the Colonel says.
Oh, right.
Sorry, we have the
Somebody,
slides up there already.
somebody interesting first. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Let's have somebody interesting before we let everybody calm down and go to sleep. Yeah, okay. Colonel Redmond says this is where we're at. Sorry about that, everybody, but I think the Colonel will make it. Here we are. Thank you, Colonel.
So first of all, I'd just like to thank everyone. For those of you that know me, I'm not going to go through the 35-minute PowerPoint. I'm just going to use 2 slides out of it. But most of you that do know me know that as of the 1st of March, I withdrew from continuing my 2-year struggle for getting a premier to try and reverse the stupidity of what we've done in COVID. The reason I did that is for my personal health, but more so for the health of my wife, who's with me here today, who's been through 18 months of hell and who I haven't been able to support properly. So I thank you for understanding and for the support you've really poured to us for the last 2 months. Tammy and Michelle did, in my opinion, an excellent recap of all the steps in linking how government has manipulated public opinion, COVID, climate change, net zero. Mass formation is a real thing. If you haven't read anything from Matthias Desmet, he's a professor out of Belgium. He and I have conversed a lot in the last year. Mass formation is a real thing, and it's happened to our entire population. The nice thing about mass formation is it can be overcome, but it's difficult and it takes a plan. The judges in our courts are making rulings on COVID because they've suffered mass formation too. And the two great lies of the last 2 years that have been perpetuated by our medical officers of health and our premiers are, number one, that lockdown mandates work and have saved us all. And number two, that vaccines are the only way out. So if you can bring up the first slide. Okay. The word lockdown never existed before COVID-19, not as it's been defined in this pandemic. There was never in the history of the world a plan to do what we did for an infectious disease like SARS-CoV-2. Those are the non-pharmaceutical interventions. And since 2005, there has been produced every 5 years a document by the World Health Organization, which discusses every one of those 15 NPIs in detail. It explains why they're good, when they should be used, why they're bad, and their dangers. 60 pages long, it discusses each one of them and goes in great detail. And the reason why that slide is color-coded, and you can see the reference on the left, the reason it's color-coded is because the first three in green are what we should have done during this pandemic. The ones in orange were marginally useful. And when I say marginally, let's use, for instance, face masks. All the science prior to COVID said that face masks were totally useless in the general population for a disease of this type. Absolutely, totally useless. All the studies during COVID have reproved exactly the same thing. They do come with severe mental health and societal health impacts, which have been ignored. Where the reason it shows in orange is masks are effective when worn in a hospital setting by professionals, where the mask is of the right type, applied, worn for a certain duration, removed, and disposed of. Okay, so that's why it's in orange. For hospital settings, they are effective. The ones shown in red should never have been used in SARS-CoV-2, COVID-19. The reason is they are totally ineffectual in decreasing transmission and have massive collateral damage. Mental health, societal health, destruction of education of our children, destruction of the healthcare for people with other severe illnesses and disease, and complete and total economic devastation of our economy. The 5 big ones. Those 5 were known to cause those effects and were strongly recommended against. Okay, now, I got to skip a long way down. Things that we knew that we simply threw away. Sorry, I didn't know I was going to do this today. So, okay, 4 conclusions. I got to go back. 1. What lockdowns, the use of those MPIs completely overlooked, was that this virus was totally focused up by age group. If you were of the age of 60 with severe multiple comorbidities, 3 or more, you are at risk from SARS-CoV-2. If you didn't fit into that category, you weren't. Seasonal influenza was more of a risk to people under 60 than SARS-CoV-2. As each variant came out, that became more and more dramatically obvious. By the time we got to Omicron, which was 12 times less deadly than the original Alpha variant. For people under the age of 60, it was the common cold, except in rare cases, normally with people who had pre-existing severe comorbidities. Our doctors knew this and have lied to us. All right, so with those 4 bullets in your mind, Paul Hinman asked the question, and I asked the question of Andrew earlier, how do we change, how do we correct the mass formation that has happened to our population? The next 2 presenters you had this afternoon followed on with climate change and with net zero. The lies have been in place and are well believed by our population, right? Mass formation on all 3 issues is a real thing. People, Canadians, smart Canadians, people all over our country in all walks of life believe these 3 things to be true. COVID was deadly. If we hadn't locked down and hadn't got vaccines, we'd all be dead. Climate change is going to kill us all, and we have to get to net zero. So how do you break the lie? The only recommendation I can give you after spending 2 years of my life, and I mean 7 days a week, normally 16-hour days, trying to influence the public of Canada to get them to understand what was in all those slides you didn't see. Thousands of people watching, lots of presentations, published papers, peer-reviewed academic studies that I've worked with doctors and with others. I've had 0 influence. So how do you change the mass formation of that 60% of the public that only watch CBC, Global, and CBC? I put it to you, in my opinion, there's only one way at this time, in a timely way, to change the narrative. There has to be one premier. The reason I say that, a premier of a province in Canada has what's called a media room. I used to work directly for Ralph Klein for 5 years. I used to stand routinely behind the man during counterterrorism days after September 11th and after all the fires and floods in the early 2000s. The media will show up every single day if the premier says there will be media availability at 2:30 today. The premier can talk about anything they want, and the media, CTV, CBC, and Global, will cover it. They may disagree with it, they may attack the message, but the next day, the premier comes back with more evidence, more facts, and talks to them again for 10 minutes. It will take 2 years to walk back the mass formation. It took 2 years to get us here, folks. But you have to break those 3 lies one at a time. And the one that I believe is easiest to break in the shortest amount of time is COVID. Because the evidence is overwhelming of the lies we've been told. So one premier, it's certainly not Jason Kenney. It's going to have to be a premier in Canada, hopefully maybe in Alberta soon. But we have to walk that lie back with the facts that are in that presentation, and we have to do it every night for 2 years. And they're the only ones that will get CBC, Global, and CTV into the homes of those 60% of Canadians who will not watch ever alternative media. That's my message. Thank you very much.
That was not a paid political announcement from the Wild Rose Independence Party of Alberta. But having said that, I'm sure they appreciate it. John, now finally it's your turn. Okay.
Well, as I was saying, it is always a pleasure to be the person whose job it is to make you glad the conference finally ended, which I will undertake to do while also attempting to live up to my self-assigned reputation as the person who actually keeps things on track, even if it means sacrificing my own brilliant remarks. There we go. We've got our...
You can have a few minutes out of my closing remarks.
No. It is so easy to slide into one rule for me and one rule for thee. It's one of the major reasons we get governed the way that we do. By the way, if anybody is ever thinking of running a political campaign and realizes that winning would be bad, call me up, because I assure you I can put a stop to that in no time. But since that's not what I'm doing, I would like to thank all of you for being here, thank all our speakers, and thank our sponsors, CFACT Canada and the Modern Miracle Network. And particularly the fact that all of you are here indicates that you actually get my title. I remember when Barack Obama was running on the slogan, "Yes, we can," and I was thinking, well, perhaps you should also think about, should we? It does rather depend. Just like that, Lily Tomlin had this joke about, all my life I've wanted to be somebody, and lately it's occurred to me I should have been more specific. But it also occurred to me back in the heady Obama days that too often Canada's slogan seemed to be, "Yes, we can't." And that we would look at something and think, yeah, it probably should be done, but it can't be done here. And we so often elect politicians, including Ottawa mayors, who just do give you that sense of futility you can only find otherwise by walking through an underground parking lot. But after the session yesterday, someone was talking to me about what needed to be done and saying, do you honestly think we can do this? And I said, yeah, I really do. I recognize that the proposition is absurd, right? But as Damon Runyon said, all life is 6 to 5 against. If anybody out there in the audience decided at some point they could get married and make it work, or they could raise kids and preserve their sanity, then, you're no stranger to taking on jobs that are obviously impossible. And so, yeah, I believe that we can restore freedom. And some people think, well, can we restore freedom in Alberta? And other people mean Canada. And I think we can. I mean, I'm hoping for Canada, and if failing that, Alberta. Yeah, by the way, Danny mentioned, someone had asked him why we did not sing the national anthem, and he said, well, we don't have ours yet. So if things go the wrong way in all of this, I just want to mention to you that before choosing a national anthem for your new country, you must listen to Advance Australia Fair, because then you will know what not to do. There are a lot of great national anthems out there. Like Israel has a great national anthem, and more power to them. Russia has a great national anthem that really should defect and find a more suitable spot. But Australia's got one that's so bad that at least no matter what you choose, it will be better. But there's a small piece of practical advice for you. Also, in his last-minute invitation to people to come, Danny quoted the film version of The Lord of the Rings, and so I'm going to quote Tolkien's good friend C.S. Lewis, or cite him. If you're a fan of Lewis's fiction, you'll be familiar with a scenario in which a small group of people with no conspicuous superpowers of any sort are called upon to tackle some impossibly enormous task and do it. And I think, Lewis was a man of great depth as well as clarity, and he was attempting to remind us all that if we have faith in the Lord, there are extraordinary resources at our disposal, and that if it's occurred to God that he should give us some job, it's not up to us to say, phooey, you don't know what you're doing. So apparently the job has fallen to us for reasons we can't fathom, so let's do it anyway. In a spirit that whatever else it may be, and recognizing the odds is anything but hopeless. I think about all the kinds of things that have been done. I remember in one of Lewis's novels, in Perelandra, the hero is faced with a job he clearly can't cope with. And this was written during the Second World War. And it occurs to him that boys who 2 years ago were not even shaving are currently leading patrols through barbed wire on urgent missions. And he thinks to himself, if they can do that, then I can take this one on. It also occurred to me something that somebody just sent me online. It was a picture of someone holding a sign that said, David could pray all he wanted, but at some point he had to pick up a rock. And so I think to some extent the reason that people come here is to get rocks, right? That we know we've got this problem and we have hope in our hearts, and we think, okay, well, how do we do it? What do we actually need to do, and what are the tools? And one of the things, by the way, and it comes up periodically at these gatherings, someone says, we got to be more like the left. We've got to get ourselves all singing from the same song sheet. We've got to have a unified plan and a unified organization and all do this one, agree on the party line. To which my response is that if we thought that way, we wouldn't be in this room to begin with, right? We'd already be with them. We are among those people who do tend not to herd easily. But on the other hand, we do debate things, we talk about them, we examine them from different points of view, and this has the great virtue that we find out what's really true. And it is amazing what an advantage it is being right when you set out to try and win an argument or prevail in a cause. And I said at the very beginning that we're fighting a battle of ideas, right? And if you're fighting maybe also of principalities and powers, but if you're fighting a battle of ideas, it's extremely important to have good ideas. If you're fighting a battle of weapons, you should probably have good weapons. And our weapons in this battle are ideas. And I think we've done very well on that, by the way. I will say I'm grateful that at least some of my remarks did seem to prevail, or else you already knew it. We had one chemtrail go overhead. We had a couple of dark forces. The Bilderbergers showed up, and I think we had some Hessian mercenaries at one point. But on the whole, we've been facing the rather dismal fact that the people we're up against are just as confused as they seem to be. Or in the case of my colleagues in the media, perhaps a little more so. But when I was talking about ideas and this peculiar problem that sensible people can disagree with you, I was by no means suggesting that there is no truth. There certainly is truth. And in fact, I want to quote that great philosopher and science fiction writer, Philip K. Dick. I've probably done this before too, but interesting. I've probably done this before too, and it hasn't worked either. Can you advance my slide? There we are. Reality is that which, when you stop believing in it, it doesn't go away. And if I've quoted that before, it occurred to me in some versions of Buddhism, there's this notion that reincarnation in the cycle of life, you can actually get reincarnated in hell if you've been really bad. You can spend some time in hell, and then you get reincarnated back on the earth. And then if things don't go well, you get reincarnated back in hell, and I'm still talking and quoting things you've heard before from me, which might also include, is it me, you, or both? Oh, got it. About this one. Rudyard Kipling's Gods of the Copybook Headings, because Kipling was one of us and wrote this great Told You So poem, of which I'm only quoting a little bit here, about when the Cambrian measures were forming, they promised perpetual peace. They swore if we gave them our weapons that the wars of the tribes would cease. But when we disarmed, they sold us and delivered us bound to our foe. And the gods of the copybook heading said, stick to the devil, you know. And the copybook, it was, Victorian kids learning their handwriting would write out improving maxims over and over. So those are the copybook headings. And then on the first Flaminian sandstones, we were promised a fuller life, which started by loving our neighbor and ended by loving his wife, till our women had no more children and our men lost reason and faith. And the gods of the copybook heading said, the wages of sin is death. In the Carboniferous era, we were promised abundance for all by robbing selected Peter to pay for collective Paul. But though we had plenty of money, there was nothing our money could buy. And the gods of the copybook heading said, if you don't work, you die. And it is remarkable how much of that is coming true around us now. And this, as I said, the great advantage of being right is that events prove you right. It's a complicated process. You never convince everybody. There's always some fool out there. But if you think about, Winston Churchill talked about how trying to warn people against Hitler in the 30s was like being smothered by a feather mattress. But in the end, of course, the events of Munich and then the invasion of Poland, the Nazi-Soviet pact, and then for Americans, the attack on Pearl Harbor, pretty much ended the debate over whether this axis of evil was a threat to people. And, things do happen, and they convince the public. And they won't always convince the zealots who are the sort of your bogeymen, right? If Michael Mann one day were to say, you know what, I was all wrong, there was a medieval warm period, it'd be great, right? We'd have him at this conference the next day. But if he doesn't, it's not that big a deal if most people go, yeah, you know what, that was absolute nonsense. And I think, and it pertains to Kipling, the kind of things that are helping prove us right. The shock of seeing the geopolitical consequences for Europeans of turning against fossil fuels and then encountering the supply disruptions because of the Ukraine war and realizing wind and solar don't get it done. Because as long as the lights kept going on, people didn't know how much was wind and solar and how much was nuclear and how much was coal. It was not sort of, but people have lives. They're not following that. But suddenly they go, hey, you told us a windmill would, run our furnace and a solar panel would fly our airplane, and it's not working. So the evidence is actually very important in all of this. Another place, by the way, and it's not just COVID, but the whole Canadian healthcare system. And I can't believe how long I've been writing about this. It's just that I wrote a piece, You Will Die Like Dogs, about MRIs at a hospital in Toronto. I think it was in 1991. And it was making the point that this MRI machine was working overtime for money, scanning people's pets and using the money to scan people. And when this was discovered, there was a great scandal and they stopped charging money and scanning pets. Well, at some point, and again, population's aging, people have contact with the health system, they realize it's not working. That we have been told things that are not true by people, and again, I'm going to say people who believe it. Like if Justin Trudeau thinks the health system works. He really does. The people who jump the queue, the prominent columnists, the politicians who get quick service think the system works. They think people like me are just malcontents, but there's a lot of malcontents, and that helps make the point that it's not working. And COVID has made the whole waiting list problem way worse, and they can't fix it no matter how much money they put in. And speaking of, though we had plenty of money, there was nothing our money could buy. Inflation. Inflation has gotten loose. And the politicians and the experts are horrified, not because they secretly knew this would happen, but had a plan from Klaus Schwab. They really didn't know this would take place. They really believed in the Keynesian hocus pocus and modern monetary theory. And those of us quoting Kipling and looking stodgy are suddenly looking smart. It's like a point a colleague of mine made years ago, that if you look at pictures of Queen Elizabeth with some visitor or another, she always looks a little bit stuffy and they're in the latest trendy clothing. But if you go and look at old pictures of the Queen, she looks perfectly normal and everyone around her looks like they just escaped from a circus. Because they were following trends that didn't hold up very well. And so, when you look at our program and the kind of variety of presentations we have, including people who disagree about substance, but also just looking at it from different angles. And we had Andrew and John talking about what the media should cover. And of course, what the media should cover and what the media do cover is so different that it's a bit crazy making. But the media, the conventional media, are losing audience share fast because they are not reliable. And people realize over time that what they read in the Globe and Mail or what they read in the Toronto Star is these attractive promises that don't come true in real life. So you see, error is the tortoise and truth is the hare. Error is the hare and truth is the tortoise, but the tortoise wins the race. Getting the metaphor right is the tortoise, but I get it right eventually. And again, what Mark Morano was talking about, the problems with this Green New Deal, and the fundamental problem is it won't work. That the people who are pushing this Great Reset really think it's going to function. They really think the unicorn power will come online. Otherwise, they wouldn't say it because they're going to get caught and are going to look very stupid. But ordinary people are discovering this when the power goes out in Texas during an ice storm, when they can't afford gas for the car. This does change the debate, provided there's been somebody out there saying, hey, you know what? It's not going to work. You're not going to be able to afford gas. And I very much liked Malcolm Roberts. I thought was a very interesting kind of tactical thing, that if you let the alarmists force you to defend your evil position, it can be somewhat awkward. But he just turned it around by asking them, okay, you say this is the science, show us the science. And he wouldn't get bullied off it. I mean, it helps to be a sitting legislator, but you've got to have the spine to say to these people, here's what you said, where is the technical paper or papers that you're relying on? And when they end up saying, people notice that. It's sort of, that wasn't a great answer there. And then we also, we had three people, Bob Lyman and Francis Metton and Catherine Swift, again, getting into some of the details of this, about the problems of generation, or Francis getting right down into how many batteries do you need. And this is the kind of stuff you don't hear in a big rah-rah speech from somebody like, say, Justin Trudeau. But, this stuff matters. And you're going to go out if you're knowing it matters, and you're going to go out if you're knowing more about it, and you're going to go out if you're knowing more about where to get the details if you need them. We get comments on our CDN site all the time. Oh, it's such a small cost to pay. It's like an insurance policy. Let's just switch our energy system over, and that way we're protected against setting the sky on fire. But when they see the premiums, it changes their thinking. Again, the gods of the copybook headings come back. And it was also very interesting. I appreciate Michael Binion coming and speaking to us. Remember what I said at the beginning about an ideologue being someone who holds their opinion even after hearing mine. And I'm afraid that Michael rather fits into that category, though he might tell you that I do, because we've had a few debates over bits and pieces of this over the years. But at the same time, it's fascinating to see somebody who is sort of calling the alarmists, saying, you wanted us to do this. Well, we're doing it. Are you happy now? And I was thinking at some point I'd get him to come up here and tell us more about how carbon capture and storage works. Because it seems to me suspicious that the gas will leak out of the ground. But then again, since Michael knows a lot more about it and is working on it, I'm sure there is something really interesting there in terms of, well, what can we do? And then also, what do they say when they say, well, you've got to do this? And then Michael says, gosh, we did it. And they say, get out of here, you bum. Or alternatively, they say, that's great. Thank you so much. Please come and invest in our province. It's very interesting to see how that works, but to be aware of what practical solutions are out there and how they're playing in the arena. I also very much liked our political panel. As you may know, when we have these conferences, we do always invite people. But when the NDP was in power in Alberta, we always invited them to say, well, we're gathering a group of right-wing nuts. Would you like to come and tell us why we're dumb? And had they come, we would have given them a civil reception. We're really interesting to see, how do you see this so differently? Please tell us what you're thinking. But they never did come. And on this panel, we wanted all the conservative contenders, and I would have very much liked to see Jean Charest up on a platform with those two, because Charest is so good, he's awful, right? That incredibly smooth, practiced political rhetoric that, thanks to my reading Mercatornet, I found out about this Australian poet, James Macaulay. And what I know about poetry would fit on a very small card. But James Macaulay is famous partly because he and his friends hoaxed the Australian modernists. And one day they created the entire corpus of work of a modernist poet and sent it in, and all the literary critics raved about it. And it was just dreadful stuff. But so that was fun. But in one of his things, he talks about this stale rhetoric that's like chewed paper in your mouth. And when I listen to these politicians, I don't know how they can stand. And again, I'm not sure that those two contenders had everything worked out in detail, and I'm glad they came here to find out more about what they should do. But boy, it had that refreshing air of authenticity, and of people who were actually thinking in front of you and sort of working through, okay, here are my principles. Like, this is how this would apply to that issue. And I think it's why the others don't come, because they know that's what we want them to do. We want them to put aside the talking points, leave them at the desk, and tell us, what do you think causes inflation? And, if you'd awakened Ronald Reagan at 3 a.m. and said, is the minimum wage good or bad? He would have told you much the same thing he would have told you if he'd had hours to prepare, because he was a conviction politician. He's the only American president ever who had been a union president, and the only American president ever who had a degree in economics. But it's one of the things that we do here is invite the politicians who will have some trouble with the press corps and this conventional rules, precisely because they're actually still thinking. This apparently is a bad idea in politics, and it's amazing how much gets done with such little actual thought behind it. But I always enjoy hearing people who are thinking about issues in front of you, even if they're in politics. And again, everyone came back and talked about the truckers' convoy and how different the reality was than the established narrative. You think, oh, this is so frustrating, the narrative prevails. But no, at some point the truth prevails. I actually teach at the small college downtown Ottawa that was within a stone's throw of the trucks, quite literally. I don't have much of a throwing arm. And I remember going down there, I wasn't delayed by a minute. I was with the occupation, the siege of Ottawa, the gridlock, but I actually went there. And I went and talked to them, and they thought I was going to give them what for, because I was wearing a suit, and then I told them how great they were, and then we were all friends. And again, Michelle Sterling talks about the models and how badly they fail, and you think to yourself, oh, and they keep using the models. But no, because the failure matters. It matters that all the predictions don't come true. As one British Prime Minister grumbled over some crisis, he said, what all the wise men predicted has not come to pass, and what all the dang fools said would happen did. And that too, that makes an impression on people. As for Tammy Nemeth, you talk about what went wrong with the Enlightenment, and I'm doing a talk at Augustine College in June about how the Enlightenment itself may have been the problem, and the Middle Ages are what we really need. But I won't get into that in much detail here. Just back to Magna Carta. But the Middle Ages believed in truth. They get a bad press, and so you can all find the link to that. But she talked about this plan they have to get all this information, all this digital stuff, so they can really know what's going on. Well, let me tell you something. You get information overload, and that will consume them. They will discover the old truth that Friedrich Hayek explained, that the planners cannot know enough and handle the knowledge. The more they know, the less they know. And so the whole thing will come tumbling down. As with, of course, inflation. Apparently, inflation was part of the Davos plan. Well, be careful what you wish for, because it's sure going to annoy people. Right? They're going to discover if they did that on purpose, they're going to wish they hadn't. And again, Brian Peckford, this is fascinating to me. It's odd because I was asked to moderate a discussion last week with Peckford, and I wasn't aware that he was still in public life, really. And then I discovered that he had this really important stuff to say, including that Section 1 was not meant to be a routine way of bypassing natural law in favor of utilitarianism. It was for invasions and earthquakes and plagues of dragons. And we got him on, I think the most important sort of historically factual thing at this conference was getting him to put that on the record. And we'll put that online. And that is just so important in understanding what went wrong. Since I'm meant to be policing myself on time, and you heard all this, I will just again say, and I'm really gratified that you all came here to hear this range of things, all these different kinds of angles, not because we have a particular thing to indoctrinate you with, but because we have faith in ordinary people. And that's what I call you normal people. I said everybody wants to be normal, no one wants to be ordinary, so normal people. Yeah, you are the people who should be running this country. And this is the kind of stuff that you need to know in order to figure out where you're going with it. And got a bit more advice, and one of them came from an odd source, which is fitting, because if you want to succeed in life, you have to be willing to be lucky. Most people, unless they're, die of some childhood disease, get a fair share of good and bad luck in life. But some people notice it when it happens and grab it, and other people are going around grumbling, I never get a break. So I never get a break. The batteries did again. I'm pointing it the wrong way is probably what's really happening. My slideshow's gone altogether. Okay, next slide. Or can I do it? Let's see. That was just listing people. There we go. And this was just in the template for my PowerPoint. So I was about to delete this slide, and then I read it and went, yeah, the way to get started is to quit talking and begin doing, which means I should quit talking, but not just yet. This thing about Brian Peckford, suddenly discovering that we had this very authoritative voice I hadn't realized was out there, and getting him to talk to the conference, and then the message spreads. Or somebody I hadn't seen since high school that I discovered was battling the University of Toronto and its vaccine mandates. We have all kinds of allies out there in unexpected as well as expected places. If we're willing to be lucky, keep our sense of humor, keep the tinfoil in the hat, and believe that we really can change the world. We need to support the infrastructure, right? As you guys do by coming here and helping us keep the EEA afloat, by donating to the JCCF and the CCF, and of course the Climate Discussion Nexus and these various other groups out there. Before he took the numbers down, Jordan Peterson, who proved that one man can make a difference. I remember his Patreon numbers. He was getting something like $50,000 a month, which is a bit more than I'm getting. But what was really interesting to me about that is that he was getting it from over 7,000 people. So he was getting about $8 a month from each of them. And that's one of the things that needs to happen, is to find and convince your friends and your colleagues and anybody who's grumbling, say, well, find one restaurant meal a month, divide it up among 10 outfits, give them $5 each, give them $3 each. It does make a huge difference. So there's a couple of mine that you can support. But the bottom line is, you don't lose hope. You don't lose your sense of humor. You come to gatherings like this so you get a better understanding of what you want to do, how you want to do it, and who's out there that wants to do it with you. And yes, we can change our country. And I think we're going to change our country. And the fact that it's going to be hard is just going to make it that much better when it happens. Thank you.
Has anybody got a question for you? Does anybody want to ask him a question? Since he's up here, that's not on the schedule, but if anybody had a question, I'm sure he'd answer it.
If you've watched the Lord of the Rings movies, you must remember one of the hobbits tells the other about the end. Don't talk to it, Matty. You'll just encourage it.
Hey, John, the Gods of the Copybook heading is one of my favorites. On the topic of inflation, though, I think the feigned surprise voiced by politicians about the origins and cause really has to be taken with a grain of salt. Because whether you're a Keynesian or a monetarist, as Milton Friedman said, inflation is everywhere and always a monetary phenomenon. So when they claim to be surprised by this, I don't believe it, and I think maybe we should take it with a grain of salt.
Well, they say salt is bad for you, which makes me think it's probably good for you. But no, because it's going to mess up their plans badly, just as it did last time. They had everything under control until prices started rising and interest rates started rising. And you look at the level of government borrowing and the cost of servicing that debt. They need interest rates low forever. It doesn't matter what it does to the rest of the economy, because if it starts going up, imagine if real interest rates get to 5 or 6% and you're Justin Trudeau and you have run up the national debt the way you have. This spells doom. But also, the thing about Trudeau is that if he seems goofy, there's a reason for this, right? He is goofy. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. His father had a reputation as a deep thinker, but he wasn't. He was clever, but he was shallow. And he too was just blindsided by deficits and stuff causing inflation. He didn't realize the government wasn't a cornucopia. Just shake it and wealth would follow. Hey, this is great. Look at all that wealth. And I think I may have told this story before, but when I was 6 or 7 years old, I was walking past a store and looking at the price tags and thinking, gee, if people had more money, they could have more of this stuff. The government should print more money. And then about 3 weeks later, I thought, what would happen? Prices would go up. It's like, sorry, social credit party, but believe it or not, they don't guess. They really don't. They think the government generates wealth, that when it gives out money and so on, it gives people a sense of security and hope and they believe in themselves, they become more productive, and the economy pours out money. And it's like the old huckster's joke about losing on every sale but making it up in volume. They honestly think it works. And this is the problem. We're not ruled by knaves, though they may have bad qualities. We are ruled by people who are just as confused as they look. They have got nothing else. John Maynard Keynes, who also I think was, giving people an excuse to believe something they shouldn't. Keynes once met Franklin Roosevelt, and he came out dismayed. He said, I'd always assumed that politicians were economically more literate than they let on. Whereas Roosevelt was like, who was that guy? He seemed like a mathematician, so it wasn't a happy meeting. But I don't think that if they'd seen this coming, they'd have tried to prevent it, because it's going to blow them up politically. Like, boy, inflation gets loose, and being a politician making promises is no fun at all. So the good news and the bad news is they're not up to something. What you see is what you get.
Yeah. What is that a question? You're coming to ask a question? Okay, good.
A question / denunciation.
Are we going to meet Norm's sister now? Like, we got a comment?
No, I just have a couple of questions. What you just said about they have no idea about inflation, and they don't really think this is going to be a problem. But I do believe they do think it's going to be a problem, and that's where the WEF comes in. Where we've caused this big problem. There's this huge problem now. Canadians have to rely on the government to get us out of this, and we'll all take all these handouts because we can't afford to pay our own bills or buy a home or do anything else, own anything. So I think is it not a tactic for the government to implement the WEF policies of basic income? That's one. My other question,
Norm's sister. Yeah.
My other question is about how you said earlier, the left says, the right, or, wherever we are in there between them and not them, being organized, and like we're so discombobulated in all these different organizations. I actually think there is some credibility to that, because it does feel fractured. And with what we saw with the protests, where so many people across Canada came together for a cause, I think it would be to our benefit to have it kind of centralized in people who do want this versus there's this chapter and this chapter and this chapter and this chapter. And we do look fragmented. We do have different organizations, but there's a key factor in that we all want our freedoms still. And so is there not strength in the numbers versus there's this chapter and this chapter and this chapter and this chapter, hard to follow, versus the left appearing cohesive. I have a bit of a problem as an individual Canadian myself going, okay, well, I got to follow this one. I got to follow this one. I've got to follow this one. Where it would be nice to have our resources and our message a little more cohesive to look stronger across Canada. That's my comments.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, yes, at some point we do have to agree on a core program. And so again, you can all watch my Constitution documentary and decide that this is exactly what Alberta needs. But the trouble is that some of you may insist on holding to your views even after hearing mine. In which case, again, I suggest you watch it again and see that I was right. And yeah, the tendency of conservatives to circle the wagons and fire inward is perhaps taken to extremes sometimes. But it's also frustrating. You always get people like Aaron O'Toole or Jean Charest, where the first thing you got to do is get rid of this person before you can possibly agree on anything that's worth agreeing on. So again, my father's point about theory being practiced with the hard bits left out, it's tricky to see how we come to an agreement on the core conservative principles in a way that doesn't sacrifice the fact that we think for ourselves. But even from a tactical point of view, don't forget there's something creepy about people all speaking in together. They made a movie out of A Wrinkle in Time, which of course completely missed the point. But the original book, A Wrinkle in Time, when they get to Camazotz, where there's this coerced unity and conformity, it's a very nasty and horrifying place. So it has both downsides and upsides. But yeah, at some point you do need to put together a coherent program. As for the inflation thing, again, I just cannot overemphasize the fact that most of these people would fail an Econ 101 test. Even if it was one written from a kind of Keynesian point of view, they would not pass it. They do not understand the foundations of what they themselves are saying, but they have a real instinct that there is a free lunch. And when somebody like John Maynard Keynes comes along and writes a book no one can understand about why there's a free lunch, they go, experts say is a free lunch. And they said if we spent a bunch of money on things people wanted, it would all be all right. Great. I can do that. And they did it, and it worked for years, and the populace was happy, and the handouts kept getting bigger, and you're going to get free health care, and we're much better than those awful Americans. Everybody was having a great time until the booze ran out, right? And nobody showed up and turned water into wine. And then suddenly the party kind of dies. But again, the idea that they secretly have a much better understanding of what they're doing. I mean, again, if you look at our prime minister, if he goes out there unscripted, he sticks his tongue in the socket. His handlers are on, half of them are probably on stress leave. And of course, the same thing with President Biden, who actually I think is not well. I mean, I never agreed with Joe Biden, but the Joe Biden of 30 years ago was a formidable character, even though he did say some daffy things even back then. But I look at these people, and what they say, if they depart from their talking points, is not the kind of thing that an intelligent monomaniac would say. It is far, far more splintered than that. And again, I very much recommend Sowell's book, because if you realize, I should say, if you accept my argument that, right, if you cease to be an ideologue and agree with me, Sowell talks about this very deep intuition a lot of people have, that the best and the brightest can manage things better than the average person and can make there be abundance just by wanting it. And that critical emphasis on that good people produce good results fairly naturally. I was George Bernard Shaw had a line that we are made wise not by our knowledge of the past, but by our concern for the future. And to me, this is, if you're Blackadder fans, right, this is one of Baldrick's cunning plans that's going to end in catastrophe. But it really is true that the people in this room who think Kipling's poem is important, right? You all laughed at that line about it began by loving our neighbor and ended by loving his wife, right? Of course, if I did that at an NDP convention, I'd be out the door. Very, very quickly, they would have found that both incomprehensible and offensive. And probably somebody finds it offensive. Conservatives are like that. But you really want to take seriously the possibility of what people tell you they think and what they reveal by the way they think about things and talk about them actually reflects what's going on inside their heads. That this really is who and what they are. This really is how they understand the world. And when the world fails to unfold as they thought it was going to, they are very much wrong-footed because they can't adjust. They made predictions. They had an understanding of the nature of society and of how economics works and of what the world is like. I mean, somebody, I remember with the Ukraine invasion, said, well, this shatters the New World Order. And I thought, there was no New World Order, you dimwit, right? But they really thought there was. People, or John Kerry, when he thought, I thought the world had said no to such things. And I was like, if the world said no, it would be kind of loud, right? You'd think it's difficult even to know what he thought that sentence meant. But to him, it was such an important truth that when Russia invaded Ukraine, he was confronted with a thing that couldn't be happening. And he didn't know what to say. And he wound up saying something goofy about, I hope this doesn't distract Russia from its fight against climate change, which is not the thing a clever person covering their tracks would have come up with. Actually, leave you with one last anecdote about my life. Many years ago, I was walking from my parents' house to a friend's house across the train tracks and, keeping some eye out for trains because of their tendency to squash you. And a train came from the corner and I froze because it wasn't on either track. And this made it hard to know how to dodge. And it was actually switching tracks as it came around the corner. And luckily, as you gather, I pulled it together and got out of the way. But this is what happens to these people when something like inflation gets loose. The train is between tracks and they freeze. And they say the stuff they say because they really didn't know this was possible. And again, I think that applies to COVID. Why did they react the way they did? Because they really thought this was a good idea. And now they're partly too embarrassed to admit it was wrong. And partly they still think they saved us. They still think we'd all be dead if they hadn't done the lockdowns. And was it Dumas once said that he preferred rogues to fools because rogues took vacations? Again, I would wish to leave you because my time is up. But again, with the thought that the problem we have is that people really believe the dumb stuff they say they believe. And the solution is to get a lot of people to stop believing that dumb stuff and start believing our smart stuff. And if we can do that, we win the battle.
Thank you. Oh, we got one more question, John. We got one more question. Okay, this is okay. That's good. Okay, that's fine.
Just something, if I can leave you with, and a few people have probably heard me say this too many times, but when we get down to economics, at the end of the day, there's one thing that is always going to be the case, and that is we can only purchase what someone's produced, and that's it. And that's really what's happened is people stop producing for 2 years and we have less things. And of course we have inflation because they put more money in, but they also have inflation because we have less things to purchase. So no matter what anyone says, it still comes down to that simple fact. And that's, I think, something we just have to keep remembering. And any politics and fancy monetary system will not change that factor. That's
I think it's a good thought, and thank you very much. And to go back to the young lady that was just up here talking about, well, the left always seem to be so united. I said, well, it's easy for the left because what they do is they say to their friends, stick with us. Don't worry about the lying, the cheating, and one thing and another. If we get our hands on the government's credit card, like you'll get your share. And the problem with conservatives is we're all, we all consider ourselves principled people, but we all have a different principle that we're prepared to quit over. And one of the things that I think there's a whole host of things, as you know, that I admire about what Michael and the Modern Miracle are doing. But, and this sort of goes back to Ronald Reagan's, I think it was the 10th commandment, thou shalt not criticize another Republican. But one of the things I think we agreed, Michael, is Michael still there? Or maybe he stepped out. No, Michael is there. But one of the things we agreed, we said, like, if you're, like if somebody's doing something, you like what they're doing, like share it out to your networks and you'll try and help them spread the message. If you're not all that fussy about what they're doing, do us a favor. Just keep your mouth shut about it. You know what I mean? And John and I, haven't always agreed on, what a tremendous president Trump is, but I took consolation. One day he was on the radio and he was telling the host there what a rogue he thought our friend Donald was, but he said, I have some like dear friends, which I was hoping he was thinking of me. He said like that quite like Donald Trump, and when we're together and his name comes up, we just look at each other in bewilderment. Like, we don't argue it over it. We just look at each other in bewilderment. I don't understand why you don't like him, but I'm sure he wonders why I do. So, but that's the point. And I think that if there's anything we've learned this weekend is let's be tolerant of our differences. Let's try and accentuate the things that we're doing well. Let's try and accentuate them. One of the things that I like, well, for one thing, I want to thank all of you. Some of you I don't think have missed a conference since we started. We've got Pat. If Pat was up beside me, she said, "Take a deep breath, breathe." But our friend colleague Nielsen, as you know, passed away just before Christmas, and this is the first conference she's missed. And as you know, when I get to my last line, I'll be saying it's not certain if we'll see each other again. Well, just at the moment, neither Colleen or a lot of you know Charmaine Belzili as well, who was just a tremendous friend of all of us. And I mean, he's gone too. So let's appreciate how fickle life is and how lucky we've been to be together for the weekend. And I want to give Rachel Notley, and you mentioned this in your thing. We invited the 4 years that Rachel was premier. We invited her to every one of our conferences, and every time we got a really nice, polite letter back saying, thanks for inviting us. I'm sorry, we're just too busy to be there. I thought it was very gracious of them, and quite frankly, like I was telling you earlier, some of my federal conservative friends have stopped sending me Christmas cards, and I think John pointed it out quite well. Why they have is because they don't want to be asked the uncomfortable questions. And I think that's it's a disappointment to me, but I guess it's I look at it and I think, well, it's their loss, and it's one of the problems we have in this country is that they're not even prepared to come and discuss their ideas with us. Having said that, and John touched on this too, well, I want to go back to Michelle was talking about how wrong the models were, reminding me of the story of the weatherman in New York. Like, he was just always wrong. So when he moved out to California and he was applying for a job, and they said, why did you leave your last job? And he said, the climate didn't agree with me. So, I mean, I guess sometimes the models are just plain wrong. But I think we've just had an amazing weekend. I think Premier Peckford gave us something that we can all sort of look at and aspire to. I would like to thank all of our speakers, which, as you know, if you're lucky, you get a thank you and not much more, but I appreciate you all taking the time. So could we start by giving all our speakers a round of applause? And maybe we'll thank you very much. And then maybe our speakers could give all the people who came, maybe we could give, well, let's just all give everybody else a round of applause for coming here. Why don't we do that? And unless there's, well, John, thank you so much for all that you do. We spend a lot of time on this, so, especially in the months leading up to it, and I appreciate the help you are to that too. And unless somebody has, is there any, I don't think there's anything I'm forgetting, are we? I think we've had a day and a half, which I think is a very memorable one. And so I'll leave you with that. Eventually you'll all know this Lincoln quote, but when he was leaving Illinois for what turned out to be the last time, he said, friends, like he said, as I leave you, the future seems uncertain. And, just to go back a little bit, our future has got more uncertain every year since we started having these conferences. I don't know if we're totally responsible for it, but nevertheless, I guess you can't blame us. At least we're trying. And when he was leaving, he said, as I leave you, the future seems uncertain, and it's not certain when or if I will see you again. But what is certain is that you've become an important part of my life, and I will always cherish the time we have spent together. That would say, breathe, and I will, and say, I will always cherish the time we've spent together. And as I leave you, I will pray that the one who can come with me and yet stay with you will bless each one of us. So thank you very much. We'll look forward to seeing you at our next conference. Thank you. Thank you.